Sound check. Okay, I'm talking in the mic. Would you like to talk more?
I will talk too. You'll have no trouble hearing me. That's usually the case.
You've got that nice low voice that carries well.
A little closer. Or turn it up a little bit. Hello, hello, hello.
All right, we got a couple of minutes.
Yeah.
Relaxing. I'm going to look at your pictures. Oh, I love this. Oh, look at you with mom. What are you guys eating? Watermelon?
I wish, I just did this on the printer, my
Yeah.
printer.
No, but it's
Yeah,
adorable.
it'd be much more colorful. Yes, that's
Is
true.
that a sibling there?
Uh-huh. Bill, my brother.
Your
When
brother.
we were really little,
They were at that age. You really can't tell.
tell.
I mean, they all look the same
Yeah,
to
and
me. I
the
would tell.
picture's old too, but yeah.
Mhm. Ooh, what a pretty top, Ray Ann. Pretty top. I didn't realize there was homework.
There's homework. You're going to have a test too.
Oh my God! Wait! I gotta see this
Not
diagram.
really.
Actual indus
Boy, I
prehension.
got a lot to explain.
Oh my. Okay, so yeah, this looks really. Did you get to the diagram? Does anyone understand the diagram without
I
an
I
explanation?
doubt
No,
it.
of course not. That's what I'm hoping. Yeah, yeah. A process worldview. Okay, that's a little bit dim for my poor little eyes.
Pardon?
Are you going to discuss this?
Oh yeah. Yeah,
Oh, I
you're going to get a crash course in philosophy.
Yes. And I knew I would have called him Brother Mesley because I was of the RLDS persuasion.
Yes, Graceland is where he was a professor.
Yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And he may have even spoken at this church. I'm like,
I
might
no,
have.
that was before I joined
I
the
know the
church.
Harsons, Ron's
Brother.
brother,
Yeah.
knows Mesley.
Hmm.
And did he go to Graceland or somehow they know each other?
Yeah.
So
CJ or TJ.
I don't know his name exact. Yeah,
What's my initials?
something like,
I'm gonna say TJ, but
yeah, something like that.
I'm not sure if that's
We
right.
actually,
Morning.
morning, Chuck.
Brady was going to have to skip out.
Oh, sure, no problem.
And it's dry.
The water's higher on Kansas side? Well, that's very generous of Missouri to share their water with y'all's.
I know the TV set. Oh, go, sir.
Oh, go ahead. No, that's fine.
It's time.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Everybody's here. You made it through the rain. Yay. I want to remind everybody about the format of our Odyssey. So, what happens here is Morris Meader, our presenter today, gets to speak uninterrupted for 30 to 40 minutes. He can speak less if he wants. After 40 minutes, I start to, give him the stink eye. And that's only because it's kind of fun to have time to ask questions. So after he finishes, we'll take a minute of silence. And I really find it helpful. We can let our thoughts settle, take a couple of deep breaths, and then we'll do an excuse me, we'll do an offering while questions are asked. I'll pass the microphone. So if you want to ask a question, just put your hand up. I'll bring the microphone to you so that the recording can have both the question and the answer. And as always, Morris does not need to answer any questions he doesn't want to. So, without further ado, Morris Meader.
Thank you and good morning. My name is Morris Meader, and I was born May 31st, 1947, so I'm 76 years old. I'm going to try to go through 76 years in 30 minutes, plus a little philosophy course thrown in there. So let's get going. Um, I was raised in Hendersonville, North Carolina. My parents were from upstate South Carolina, Union County, out in the rural area. Um, my uh, parents were related before they married because my great great grandfather on the Meader side, his daughter married my mother's maiden name is Crosby. Stephen Crosby, my great grandfather on her side. I don't know exactly what relations that make them, but um, my uh, great great grandfather. This is the house, the plantation house that he had. It was a cotton plantation. They actually owned slaves, though it was smaller than a lot of them you see. But anyway, there's a picture of it. The pictures beside it are later on. The house got pretty dilapidated. During his day, it was very prosperous. But then after, the Civil War and the boll weevil and all of that, the cotton went away and they weren't making any money. Time I knew this place, it was all pine forest that way in that area because Roosevelt during the Depression era, all that land had become gullies and washed away, and nothing was growing. And he made some of it national forest and planted pine trees and let wildlife loose. So that's the way I knew it. But back in the day, it was a cotton plantation. My great great grandfather Meader, John Meader, his daughter, as I said, married Stephen Crosby, and he set his son-in-law up in business. And so over the other side is this house. This is the Crosby house, and that rectangular part of the house was a store building, and he ran a general store and a post office there. And the building dates back to about 1850. Keith and I lived there about 3 years and restored it. The other picture there is after we restored that house. Um, anyway, that's sort of that history. But after my parents married, they moved up to Hendersonville, which is up in the mountains, 20 miles south of Asheville, and it is a wonderful little town that I grew up in. A very tourist town. A lot of back before World War II, tourism was different. A lot of the people would come and stay the whole summer or weeks at a time. It's a town like Hot Springs or some of these others where they're big hotels and people would stay long periods of time. Nowadays they just fly through, and go further up in the mountains. But anyway, it's also a big retirement area. That's the town I grew up in. Uh, when I was in school, I well, I was a member, our family was a member of the First Baptist Church in Hendersonville, which was a large church. We had about 2,000 members. And so we had, full staff and lots of programs. And that was my mecca. I didn't do so much at school, that is, social life or anything. It was all revolved around the church. And Baptist on Sunday, we had Sunday morning service, Sunday evening service, we had Wednesday prayer meeting, we had, all this stuff. Uh, I had a youth group called Royal Ambassadors, sort of like Boy Scouts, only it was more religious. So that was there. Our minister was there for 17 years, and he, the whole time that I grew up there, and he was, I would say, quite liberal in his thinking. So it was not the traditional evangelical that you think of as Baptist. Of course, the uh, Baptist church at that time was much more moderate than it is today. They had the coup back in the 80s where it really went off the rails and became so fundamentalist. At that time, it was drifting to be more and more moderate, and certainly the church there was. Um, Mr. Goss, the minister, went to Andover Newton, which is, some of you know, is in Boston and is, I don't think it exists now, but it was a identified with Unitarian. So it was, but he had a way of saying things in his sermon that could be taken either way. And my mother was shocked. She was a school teacher, and she and Mrs. Goss used to ride together, carpool together. They taught out in the county, one of the county schools, and she was shocked when uh, uh, Pastor Goss's wife said he doesn't believe in heaven or hell. So, but I don't think any of the rest of the church necessarily knew that. It's not something he would talk about. Well, anyway, from the I've been oriented towards church and religion all my life, and I've always had lots of questions, normal questions that anybody would have, like uh, evangelical theology is that you have to make your profession of faith and be saved if you're going to go to heaven and all that kind of business. Well, everybody talked that, but I always wondered why they didn't take it more seriously. I mean, if I believe my family or friends was actually going to go to hell if that didn't happen, I think that would be my first time, first priority. But most, said it, but that's about all they did. Um, and you wonder how much they believed it. Also, I had questions like the gods, when we studied history, world history, the gods of Greece and Rome and Egypt and all, we don't think much of them as gods anymore. And I wondered, how about our Christian supernatural God? Will the day come? And I think it has come where it's been demoted quite a bit. So when I was in high school, I belonged to a religious book club. I got records subscribed where I get records of sermons. So from the beginning, I've been quite interested in all of that. After high school, I went to the Wingate Baptist Junior College in North Carolina. It's just close to Charlotte. There's 6 Baptist colleges in North Carolina. The most famous one, or the one you've heard of, is Wake Forest. That's but there's 5 others, and Wingate was one of them. Time I went there, it was a junior college. Now they call it Wingate University. Um, now went there 2 years, of course, and this this summer after my last year there, I and 2 or 3 other uh, uh, friends there um, volunteered to be summer missionaries and to North Dakota. And that's the first time I'd been west of the mountains, and it was in many ways it was quite an experience for me. First of all, taking the bus, we took the bus, Greyhound bus, which took 2 or 3 days to get out to Colorado, where we had this little orientation thing, and then up to North Dakota. And basically, we just did vacation Bible school. They had a summer camp for the state Baptist, and we, taught little things in that. It was interesting that at that camp they had a lake and a little beach and where the kids swim, but the uh, they wouldn't let the boys and girls swim together. So the girls would go in and swim for an hour or two, and then let the water sort of clear out, and then the boys would go swim. I never had run across that before or since, but that's how conservative they were there. Uh, Also, I came to the realization. You see, when I grew up, even in Hendersonville, which was more cosmopolitan than a lot of places, um, Baptists were like the very most dominant church. Baptist, Methodist, and Presbyterian were the biggest 3 churches in my hometown. So I just thought that was the center of the world, religious world. When I got up there to North Dakota, they looked upon us as sort of a cult movement. And I first began to realize that, evangelical Christianity is an offshoot of the main Christian uh, uh, religion, which is Catholic and Lutheran, the more liturgical churches. That's the mainstream, and evangelicals really sort of late and an offshoot of that. So I came to that understanding that it's not the center of the world during that trip. After Wingate, I decided to go to Oklahoma Baptist University. It's in Shawnee, Oklahoma, just east of Oklahoma City. I did this for several reasons. One thing is I just wanted to see a new country or be part of a new area that I never uh, was just introduced to when I took that trip as a summer missionary. Second of all, the OBU was I noticed in reading Southern Baptist periodicals that a lot of the um, uh, kids of executives in the church they sent them to that school, so I thought it was probably a good school to go to. Also, when I was at uh, Wingate, I dated this girl. Her name was Alice. Really liked her a lot, but I was never sexually or romantically that attracted to her. I mean, we were good friends, but for me, that was about it. She might have been more interested in being more serious, but by going out to Oklahoma, that of course ended that. Ironically, though, she went to senior college at another Baptist college in North Carolina called Mars Hill. And my brother, I have one brother, Bill, he's 3 years younger than me, went to that same college and they ended up getting married. They live in Raleigh now. They live in Raleigh now and have kids and grandkids and a wonderful life. So that's that. Now, at timeline, I've got dates here, but 68 was when I started school at OBU. And you, of course, all remember what kind of year that was with the assassinations of Kennedy and Martin Luther King. I think there was a real traumatic Democratic convention in Chicago. Of course, the war in Vietnam. So the campus was really, you know, some of the kids did protests and then a lot of debates, and it was a uh, pretty exciting time just to be there in school. I was sort of stuck in between. I didn't know what I believed. I would sort of argue the conservative view or theology to the liberals, and the liberals would do the opposite. And so, anyway, um, but one of the things that I discovered there, and this is come here comes my little philosophy course, was I did major in philosophy and took a course in modern philosophy, and I was introduced to the philosopher's named Alfred North Whitehead, and he is the more or less contemporary founder of process relational thought. Um, it's and I probably the second most important person in my life, other than Keith, my husband over there, in my way of thinking. So I just want to spend a minute or two. I'm going to try to make it real fast because we'll run out of time to tell you about him. He was a professor of physics and math at Trinity College, Cambridge. He went to school there for 5 years and taught there for 25 years until uh, he was offered a professorship at Harvard in 1924. He was 68 years old and he came over to Harvard. When he was at Cambridge, um, one of his students that you will recognize is Bertrand Russell. They put a book, it's actually 3 volumes, called Principia Mathematica out. And it's a seminal volume having to do with mathematics, grounding it in logic or something. I don't understand any of that. But anyway, it's a main book. But when he came to Harvard, he turned his attention to uh, philosophy, or we say metaphysics. And this is where he wrote all the stuff that we remember him for now. He wrote a lot of books about education, a lot of other things, but this is an important part. Now, when I say metaphysics, what is metaphysics? Um, I got it written down here. Inquiry into first principles of nature, the study of the most fundamental generalization of what exists. In other words, we're talking metaphysics, of course, beyond physics. You have to be more imaginary than things that you can just prove with, like you would in science. But we're trying to figure out what's really real. What is the smallest thing in existence, and how is the universe organized? How can we understand it? Now, this whole area is pretty defunct now. In fact, Whitehead is maybe the last philosopher that has even tried to do this. And the reason is, well, this is where we get in a little history. You know, the um, the uh, plate the it's always been a debate in philosophical understanding between being and becoming, being and becoming. Plato and Aristotle took the side of being. What's really real are things, object, and Plato thought that even chairs and tables and all in this world are not perfect. What is perfect is the ideal, he called them forms out there somewhere that uh, and that is the perfect, say, the perfect chair. And every other chair is, it's either a different color or some of them have more legs than others. If it's a swing, doesn't have any legs. So that is the sort of the being side, and that is um, when Christianity came along, started out as a small movement, when they started trying to uh, form a theology, philosophy, of course, they adopted the metaphysics was there. And so that's how we come up with a supernatural God that has been part of Christianity ever since. Since the perfect Plato saw the perfect as being a non-moving, perfect thing out there. So obviously, that's what God would be. Now, the um, and that worked all right until the 1500s to the 1700s when we began to science began to be scientific thinking began. People started understanding how things worked, and when this happened, uh, one of the main philosophers, usually they start modern philosophy period by talking about Rene Descartes. Descartes, you probably heard the famous saying that he is identified with him. I think, therefore I am, cogito ergo sum. But his main contribution was that he divided substance between mental and physical. And he thought, in other words, our minds, we have our brains, but beyond that, there's something that is who we are, our psyche or whatever, however you want to call it, our minds. He said that was part of the spiritual world, the same world as God. And the physical, even our physical bodies, had no feeling, no experience. And animals and plants, all of that was this other world. And so that's called Cartesian dualism, and that's been a big part of Western thought ever since. Now, of course, we know that is all crazy, because if you touch a stove, you can definitely hot stove, you can definitely feel it. Our bodies do have feelings, but that is their thought. So in the 17th century, when science came on strong, um, a lot of that world, supernatural world, was just sort of written off and ignored. And the some of the founders of our country, like Jefferson, they were deists. Well, that's one way of dealing with it. God created the world, and then he left to play in another playground and just left us here. That's a deist thought.
Hmm.
Um, so modern times, Whitehead believed, and I think it's true, we're sort of dominated by a real materialistic view of the world. That is, the scientific view is really materialistic. It's sort of mechanical. Um, it's everything has to be proved in a test tube or something like that. The one of the philosophers of the 17th century is Isaac Newton, and the uh, uh, from that era, the physics is called Newtonian physics. He saw the world as like, well, think of a billiards table and a pool table and the balls on the pool table. It's all very mechanical. Of course, at that time they didn't have the microscopes that we have today and all of that. So that's how they interpreted the world. Well, when Whitehead came along, of course, I didn't tell you his dates. He was born in 1861 and died in 1947, the year I was born. But he was, alive and friends. They debated Einstein, for instance, the theory of relativity. Darwin had preceded Darwin's book on evolution. Um, and what is known as quantum physics was beginning to come about. Quantum physics has to do with microscopes now that can see much finer things, and quantum understands that e- existed on the 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 smallest level we can understand is not so much things as like energy. We don't think in terms of little atoms knocking together anymore. We think of fields of energy and all of this kind of stuff. So this informed Whitehead, and he wrote a book that called Process and Reality, and that's the sort of the main Bible of process thought now. Now, I am going to read one little paragraph here, but you can read along with me or follow along with me. It gives you sort of a indication of sort of the flavor of all of this. Um, at the core of process relational thought is a focus on the world making creativity of things. Whitehead believed that creativity was the dominant force in the universe, on how things become rather than what they are, on emergence rather than structure. According to this understanding, the world is dynamic and always in process. As someone put it, reality is spontaneously dynamic, hyper complexity of living things with a tendency to form habits. That is to say that reality is emergent, evolutionary, and creative, a view that coincidentally, not coincidentally, finds much resonance with the 20th century development in physics and biology, including quantum mechanics, ecology, chaos, and complexity theories. This reality is constituted at its core not by objects, permanent structures, material substances, cognitive representation, or platonic ideas or essences, but by relational counters and events. So the center of Whitehead is our experience. Now, how do you know things anyway? Uh, Anything, chairs, table, how do you relate to it? It's your experience of it. That's what's really real. It's your experience of it. You're sitting here listening to me now, and it's the experience. And so sees the smallest things in existence are these, he calls it drops of experience, which he calls actual occasions. So we can sort of understand the world, the universe, our lives, all uh, in these terms. Now, um, the uh, the little diagram I have here is these actual occasions or experiences. It's not like, say, this whole hour that you're in here and I'm talking to you is one experience. Experience are seconds long, and it's all like screamed together. That's what our life is a stream of these experiences. And this little diagram tries to help explain that. Somebody else created this. I just copied it. So on the left is past actual world. In the middle is the experiencing subject, and before so it's like accumulation of, he calls them apprehensions, when you absorb all the things that influence you, and not just physical things, but he emphasized psychological things, your feelings all come to play. But then the experience comes to an end, and a new one is formed out of that. And a famous phrase in Whitehead is, the many become one and are increased by one. That sounds crazy, but you think about your parents, or if you're parents and you have a kid, isn't that, or kids, isn't that what happens? The come together, and then you have kids, and then that's a new entity. But he say all life is like that. And what one thing is crucial is that when one experience is over and a new one is born, there's a point there where there has to be a decision made. And that decision is really the basis of freedom in our uh, world, uh, uh, because there is a choice that has to be made. I know Isaac, for instance, mentioned he believed in freedom of thought. Um, uh, many um, uh, we all think we have freedom, but back in when predestination was touted by a lot of people, it was, the image was God created the world, and it was already done from beginning to the end. We just didn't know what the end was. And, sort of like putting a needle down on a record, it would come play to the end and it'd all be the same. That's determination. Today, we have a lot of that same feeling with the idea, a sort of materialistic idea that everything uh, is determined. When uh, a uh, serial killer or somebody does their thing, we often say, "Oh, he was almost programmed to do that because of his background. Maybe he was abused as a child or whatever." Um, but Whitehead is saying that there is that point of choice there, and Whitehead says that. Uh, so you see this sort of river of experiences that is our life and the whole world. And there is no future until this occurs, and life goes on. So there's no possibility of determination or predestination. That each moment is brand new and is created in this sort of river of feelings that go on. Well, I've already taken up too much time. Um, the second part of this is that uh, his view is that this world of experience is not just human, but that animals, plants, everything is also part of this world. And for a long time, animals, maybe even our bodies, were not considered um, this way. So we tended to, uh, uh, you know, abuse animals, really. I've read stories in the 17th century where they uh, uh, like hung a cat up on a fence and stabbed it, and they thought of it as a machine. They didn't understand that like we do nowadays, that everybody's got a dog or a cat or a pet knows that they have feelings, but at that other way, other uh, in the more materialistic view, You didn't have that. So I want to get on beyond this. I want to talk about Whitehead's view of God. I think I'll skip that. It's a whole different idea. And I wanted to say the last page in here is the uh, I gave you references. This book is tremendous, understanding it. It's by Robert Mesley, who has some identity with Kansas City because he was a professor at Graceland College up in Iowa, and I think he's even taught some classes here. I know Rod Harson's brothers are good friends of him and so forth, but it's a great introduction, and I've got some other stuff there. I want to go on though, because I want to get to some of the rest of my life. Um, After OBU, I was conflicted about what I was going to do, but I finally decided to go to Southwestern Seminary in Fort Worth, Texas. That was a very conservative Baptist seminary, and I thought if they couldn't straighten me out, nobody could. And they didn't. I was I was disappointed because I wanted to come to find some answers, go to school to find some answers, and they weren't about that so much, at least on the beginning levels. They wanted to teach you how to do things. I took classes on how to construct a sermon and all that kind of stuff, how to do things, and I wanted some churches like Catholic and I think Lutheran, they call it formation, where they spend a lot more time helping people understand what their spiritual life is and answer some of these questions. They didn't do much of that there, so I dropped out. And then uh, worked for a while at a grocery warehouse in the pulling orders out of the frozen food uh, um, area. uh, Areas bigger than this room, and it was a terrible job. But there we also after working there for a little while, me and some of my friends were recruited by recruiters looking for people to work in the copper mines in Arizona. And so we said yes, and all loaded in my car. I had one of these big Chevrolet 69 with the fins on it. It was a station wagon too. So two other guys, they were married, but they left their families back in Fort Worth until they got settled there. And I went there, and so I worked for a year in Tucson at a copper mine. When I say worked at a copper mine, it's really the mill. When they nowadays you can't get pure copper, you can't mine pure copper. There's none left. So what they do is they dig up dirt, and about 2% is copper, and there's a elaborate process they go through to separate the copper from the dirt. And it was interesting work, and a beautiful country. I love Tucson. It was desert, Sonoran Desert. And the mine was up on the side and the mill was up on the side of a mountain about 20 miles from Tucson. We had to drive back and forth every day. Um, but while I was in Tucson, I still had my religious, I was still interested in questions and so forth. And so I decided to go back to seminary. And this time I went to and in order to do that, you needed a recommendation from a local church. You didn't have to have it, but that was strongly encouraged. And so I went. I'd been going to the First Baptist Church in Tucson, involved in Sunday school classes and so forth. And the Baptist Student Union was there. Some of my friends, because the University of Arizona is there, so I went, and I went before the Board of Deacons, and the Board of Deacons, uh, I was shocked because they immediately began querying me about what I believed. Do you believe in the virgin birth? Do you believe in this and that and the other? And I says, well, that's the reason I want to go to schools, find out what I believed. Um, Now, I didn't know the full story till much later. So they didn't recommend me, but a minister of church when I was at OBU recommended me. I got in the seminary. But anyway, the um, they didn't. I didn't know the full story, the background when I was there. I found out later that they had an interim minister. His name was White, Dr. K. Owen White, and that in 1962 he was president of the Southern Baptist Convention, and they had a big scandal at Midwestern Seminary here. This is where I was planning to go here in Kansas City, because a professor, his name is Ralph Elliott, wrote a book entitled "The Message of Genesis," and he dared to say, that Genesis was, from the historical critical standpoint, was not um, uh, well, it was myth and so forth. And so he got booted out of the seminary, and there's a big scandal over it. I didn't know any of this, but he was the interim. White was interim minister at the church when I asked them for recommendation. And I mean, the thing is that you come up with the experience of people that are so well. I thought of the idea of, an ideology is like you're wearing a pair of pink glasses, so the whole world is pink to you, and you can't understand anything else except what you see there. And these uh, 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 men, and they were men that were deacons. Uh, they were nice men, but they just were part of that. So that was one experience I had that um, informed my religious thinking. Um,
About 5 minutes.
about 5 minutes, so I'm going to skirt through this pretty quick. After that, I came to got to Kansas City, and of course, this is the first time I've lived in Kansas City, and 3 years, got my Master of Divinity degree. Um, when um, I started dealing with my sexuality when I was there, and before this, I just felt like, hadn't been turned on by a woman necessarily romantically or sexually or anything like that, and I just always thought, well, it would happen one day, but it never did. And I began to realize that who I really was interested in was other men, and so I sort of came out to myself uh, there. And then at the end of 1975, um, we made a trip. Archaeology professor organized a trip of students. We went to the East and saw all the biblical sites and everything for a couple of weeks. When I came back, I decided and then of course I graduated from the seminary. I moved to Westport and started my experience as a gay man, and first lived down here off of uh, 42nd and Locust and building, and then later over by Hyde Park with some other guys. And it's about that time that I met Keith. Uh, Keith and I have been together for 44 years now. Uh, he was a Lutheran minister, actually had a church up on in the northeast area off Independence Boulevard. But he had come out. He was married and had three small kids, and divorced his wife. But we were always great friends, even though he divorced her. And eventually, Keith and I moved in together. I moved in with Keith in 1979. Uh, First lived at Row Village, Roland Park. Then Keith became a administrator of a nursing home in Gardner, Texas, and we lived there a year. And it had, I think, 9 or 10 retirement homes around the nursing home. We got to live in one of those free, so we were able to save quite a bit of money. I took Keith home uh, back home with me one Thanksgiving, and we saw the farm down there where my Crosby parents lived, the house that I showed you there, and I was really shocked when he said, "I would like to go there and live." and it had been abandoned for 8 years since my grandparents were dead. So it was, and the house was very old anyway. But we did move down there and lived there for 3 years, and it was a great experience. We worked hard fixing up the house. Keith, this is how he got into library work. He became children's librarian at the Little Carnegie Library in Union, and I worked as a printer at the daily newspaper, Offset Web Press, printing the newspaper. Um, but after 3 years, and I got laid off my job, we decided to move, and we moved back to Fort Worth. Of course, I'd lived there when I went to the seminary. I didn't know it until I met Keith, but Keith actually, his first church was in Fort Worth, so we both had background there. And that's where Keith and I, uh, our major uh, uh, work life was. For 18 years, we lived in Fort Worth, and he worked for the Central Library in Fort Worth, and I drove a city bus for those years. Um, then we went. Uh, I think I'm about run out of time, but we went to Lutheran Church for a while, and then the first Unitarian church where we were members of was, at that time it was called First Jefferson UU Church, and the pastor was Craig Rosshaven. Craig Rosshaven was, I think they were like roommates at Meadville Lombard with Eller, that was pastor here. Anyway, he was a great preacher, and uh, I wish I could had time to go into all the details. We uh, the Jesus Seminar was, I don't know if you know what that is, was popular back at that time. One of the heads of that was at TCU, Texas Christian University, there in Fort Worth, and I, Craig would take me uh, down there once a month to their meetings, and we learned a lot. Um, I let's see now. So eventually, after driving the bus, I took classes on networking, computer networking, and worked for Xerox for a few years, but then got laid off of that job when they moved the whole help desk area to Canada. And so eventually, then we moved back up here to Kansas City. We lived north of the river for a number of years. I got a job as at the airport, driving the airport rental car shuttle buses, which were small at first, but then they consolidated and they got big, like city buses, big buses. Um, and then one year we moved down here and lived in a condo, which is right down here on Walnut, right behind Quick Trip. And that was a wonderful place. And we could just walk to church. It was really nice. Um, and then Keith's daughter-in-law, his son Chris, and he's still living in Fort Worth. That's where he was born. Uh, she had a stroke, and it was small children, and so we decided we had to go there and help them out, which we did for. We thought we were going to do it 5 years. We ended up staying 8 years, and we financially supported them. We bought a house. And eventually ended up giving it to them and so forth. But now those kids are, graduating from high school. At the time, Chris and his wife, of course, she with a stroke she was recovering from, weren't working, but now they are working, so things are, pretty well there. And that's when we decided in 2019 to move back up here, and we couldn't find a condo in the area, so we ended up in Independence. But we're very happy there, and we're very happy to be involved in the church again. And so I better conclude it there. Yep.
Okay, so let's take a minute to just take some deep breaths. And we'll go ahead and pass the basket. And I think we have time for a few questions. I will hang on. I'm going to take moderator privilege. I don't always do this, but the question that was just burning in my mind as you spoke of these philosophies is how that affected you. I mean, apparently it was very significant, or you would not have included it in your Odyssey. But I didn't quite get the connection between the philosophy and how you lived your life for major decisions.
Well, and I won't speak to this too long, but it is important in my life. You know, in these Odysseys, the last several I've been to, people have said, like Isaac said, I believe that um, there is a freedom of thought, but he didn't know why he believed that. I think George says, I think there's something out there that is more, but again, no real explanation of what it's all about. I think Whitehead, to me, gave those answers. The whole idea that there is more than this materialistic world we live in, and there's more facts than just the scientific proofs. So Whitehead is the uh, person who and process. And I just didn't have time to give so many examples, but the process movement is not just particularly Christian. Uh, it's you can be a Muslim, you can be a Jew, you can be whatever. It's a background to many of the questions. I think a lot of what we believe as Unitarians, it gives sort of a grounding for that.
Uh, Observation first. Uh, I wish you had given a lot more on your personal life because that exemplifies what process is about.
Yeah.
Uh, and of course, we've this is not a new discussion between us. Okay, he's much more comfortable, and I understand that in the world of words as opposed to dealing with your human experiences. There are lots of things like your relationship to your mother and father, and different experiences you've had as you've grown up. Really, they teach us about process, and that. But that's the only comment. Like to have heard a little bit more about you personally
That's,
and
I'm
your
sure that's true.
experience.
By the way, Keith gave his Odyssey back before we left, maybe 15 years ago. So if you want to hear his story and much more personal, I guess you can go to the library and check out. I suppose they still have those.
I want to take you back to 1968. I'd like to hear what you remember of that time when you were dealing with what was going on and how your philosophy and your attitudes at that time influenced your relationships with other people dealing with all of these bad things that were happening in 1968. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, well, of course, as I said, it was really a dicey time for the whole country, and certainly on campuses. I was dealing with the fact that I really didn't know what I believed or what I was going to do, whether I was going to try to go to the seminaries and go into the ministry or that type of thing. Um, uh, there's groups on campus that demonstrated against the war. I was lucky. Of course, I first had a ministerial deferment, and then they had the lottery, and I got the right number there, so I was pretty much excluded from having to go to Vietnam. That would have been devastating for me. I don't think I could have handled it. Um, so it was. Um, I remember my friends and I had lots of discussions, a lot of debates. I remember I had a class um, in theology, Christian theology at OBU, and then I had my philosophy classes, and the contrast was really significant. So mostly that period was just a period of upheaval in my life, but like I'm sure it was for a lot of people at that time.
You touched briefly when you said that Keith did his 15 years ago on the Odyssey, and you kind of touched briefly when you were in Tucson that you went to a Unitarian church. Can you talk about when you transitioned kind of out of the Baptist teachings and probably Keith Lutheran when you kind of came over to Unitarian or UU?
Well, uh, I I left so much stuff out. When I came out as being gay here in Kansas City, um, I joined I was pretty involved in the gay movement here, Gay People's Union, which started at UMKC. Those students actually fought a legal challenge all the way up, I think, to Supreme Court about having the group being able to meet on campus, a gay group. At that time, they wouldn't. But when I joined it, they were having rap groups, and I went to those. That's where I met Keith through that. Um, but also, I went to the MCC Church, and the MCC Church was formed by Troy Perry, that was a Pentecostal minister out in California. It became I think at the top they had several hundred churches, including one here. And the first time I was in a well, the first time I was in here at All Souls was because All Souls let MCC meet here in Conover for a while. When this was when most churches said we were all going to hell, and it was, they were not friendly at all. When we were in Fort Worth, we were in this Lutheran church. It was fairly liberal in a lot of ways. And we campaigned big time to make it a welcoming church, which it finally did get to be. There's a group called Lutherans Concerned that's associated with the Lutheran Church. We were very active in that. Um, but then we sort of got burn out, and I thought it was never going to change. Well, it did change in the Lutheran Church. The ELCA, Lutheran Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, finally did come around to accepting gay people, marrying them, having gay ministers, so forth. But at that time, I didn't think it was going to happen, and so we moved over to the other side of town, and that's when we first went to a Unitarian church, and I. Uh, was so enamored because in Fort Worth, I spoke a number of times on TV or other groups, and who was there supporting us was Craig Rosshaven, the Unitarian minister, and so that's how we first. And before that, I didn't hardly know what Unitarians were. That's sort of how I got introduced to that.
I like the way you mentioned that the Greek gods got demoted. We've had over the millennia, we've had so many gods associated with the harvest. We had a Celtic goddess. The harvest was called Lugnasha. Then the Christians came around, did Lumas. Then the Catholics came around and changed it to Loaf Mass Day. Do you see, in context of what you talked about process, do you see humanity over these millennia to come? Do you think we're going to concoct new gods, or how do you see that's going to happen?
Well, when Whitehead started uh, coming up with his metaphysics, he was not a religious person. He was not involved in any church or anything like that. But he said uh, that there had to be a God there for well, example was given. Remember the Pluto was discovered fairly late, and for years they knew that Pluto or something existed, even though they couldn't see it by telescopes, just because of the relationships to other planets. They knew something gravitational. There had to be some explanation. So it's not a proof of God, but in the same sort of context, Whitehead says, there's some things that can't be explained without it. And a lot of that has to do with um, why. We all believe in evolution. I think most of us do. But why? Why does it happen? Why we don't have an explanation of why when there's procreation, why there is just not dead still. Why things happen. And so for that reason, I think, and we put the name God on it. You don't even have to do that, but there is some force, and this is the reason that he said that there's got to be something, force there we call God, and he came up with a unique way of he called that the primordial view of God, and it's very important of understanding God, and I think we'll always have some kind of uh, and that's really what I'm lobbying for. Is I think we should not. Uh, uh, there's more than just the materialistic world that has so dominated our culture today, and we should emphasize that more.
I have a question about really your choices in your personal life. It seems that several times you sought education that might have resulted in your getting a ministerial appointment somewhere, or it might not have been a minister. It might have been on the staff of a church.
Yeah.
But I don't think you described that you ever held a position in a church.
No, no. When I graduated from Midwestern, that was when I was just coming out as being gay, and of course, especially among Southern Baptists, there was just no way. I didn't think. I mean, I guess probably could have, but I just wasn't. And also my feelings, my questions, and all about the faith, about theology was quite quite liberal. I remember at Midwestern that uh, in the New and Old Testament classes, a lot of the students there were they were married. Some of them had little churches out in the county and so forth, but they were coming to get their degree, and they'd sit in class, and they would almost understand the historical critical view of the Bible. And then they'd go to their church, and of course they couldn't say anything there about that. And then they would like come back the next week and start all over again. Well, I just realized I there's no way I could I could do that, or be like the minister that I grew up under, who spoke sort of double speak all the time. He had his views, but he didn't really share them with. So I just sort of decided I'm very church oriented in religion, but would never be a minister.
Central to this, what you've been talking about today, is the conflict between science and in religious thought,
Exactly.
and then the inability to deal with evidence that conflicts with theology.
Right.
And so that seems to be central to what's happening in America right now. Would you expand on the idea of how to work with evidence and theological oriented people to convince them that maybe they need to be a little bit more open minded?
Well, of course, the reason I'm so enamored by process thought is that it is a way of having uh, the more religious ideas and science without conflict. In other words, Whitehead believed in one world, and and everything is operating under the same scheme, and we can have it together. And I do think we have lost, even in the Unitarian Church. I didn't mention humanism. I got really strong in humanism when I was at the West Side Church in Fort Worth. But many of the humanists are, atheist, and they think that if you're humanist, you got to be an atheist. And I don't believe that. I believe there is a something beyond the materialistic world that so dominates our culture and our science. And there is knowledge to be had there. a different kind of knowledge, and that's what, of course, Whitehead. His one of his first books at Harvard was Science in the Modern World, and he gave that. It was a series of lectures at the. It was given at the English Chapel Church, the first Unitarian church there in Boston, the one the kids go visit all the time. King's Chapel Church. Yes, the lectures were given there, and later made into the book. But from that point on, he was dealing just with these questions.
We unfortunately have no more time for other questions or discussion, though this was absolutely great. Thank you very much, Morris. This was wonderful. And be sure to come back in a week. We have a couple, Royal and Peggy Scanlon, who will be presenting. Thank you. That was.
I just, tried to.
But Keith
do
is right. There was you went too far on this.
Yeah,
You didn't
yeah,
talk about your own
yeah.
beliefs, and so that left a lot of questions.
A lot of questions.
Yeah.
I was